America leads the world in artificial intelligence. Its companies build the most advanced AI models. Its investors pour billions into new technologies. Its data centers process information at a scale few countries can match. But there is one problem. Those machines do not run on intelligence. They run on electricity, and America suddenly needs far more electricity than anyone expected. In Northern Virginia, the world's largest concentration of data centers continues to expand. New AI systems require enormous computing power. Every new model needs more servers, more cooling systems, more infrastructure, and most importantly, more electricity. Now imagine a future where the country leading the AI revolution begins facing growing pressure on its own power grid. Imagine utilities struggling to keep up. Imagine electricity demand rising faster than supply. And imagine one of the most important answers sitting just across the border, in Canada. For decades, Canada was often viewed as the junior economic partner in North America. A reliable supplier, a resource exporter, a country that adapted to decisions made elsewhere. But the AI revolution may be changing that equation, because Canada possesses something increasingly valuable: vast hydroelectric resources, abundant fresh water, stable energy infrastructure, and the ability to generate clean electricity on a massive scale. Suddenly, a quiet question is beginning to emerge. What happens when the world's largest AI economy needs more Canadian electricity than expected? What happens if energy becomes the hidden bottleneck of the AI era? And what happens if Canada discovers that its greatest advantage was never oil manufacturing or even trade, but power itself? Not political power, electrical power. The kind that keeps entire digital economies alive. The stakes are enormous. Some analysts believe AI-driven infrastructure spending could reach tens of billions of dollars across North America. Entire regions are competing to attract investment. Governments are racing to secure energy supplies. Technology companies are searching for stable locations where future expansion will remain possible. And for the first time in many years, Canada may find itself holding a stronger strategic position than many expected. If Canada's future in the AI economy matters to you, stay with us. Because the real story is not about artificial intelligence. The real story is about a hidden dependency that has been building quietly for decades. And what happens next could reshape the economic relationship between Canada and the United States in ways few people saw coming. But the real pressure had not started yet. For generations, the economic relationship between Canada and the United States seemed easy to understand. America built, Canada supplied. America consumed, Canada exported. It was not always perfectly balanced, but it was predictable. Millions of jobs depended on that arrangement. Factories in Ontario supplied parts to plants in Michigan. Energy flowed south. Goods crossed the border every day. Families on both sides built their lives around a system that appeared stable. Yet beneath that stability was something many people rarely noticed. Modern economies do not run on money alone. They run on infrastructure. They run on transportation networks, supply chains, transmission lines, power grids, and when one part of that system begins to strain, the effects can travel surprisingly far. Tom understands this better than most. He is 63 years old and lives in Ohio. For much of his career, he worked in manufacturing. Over the years, he watched factories modernize, then automate, then in some cases disappear altogether. He has seen economic promises come and go. Now he hears politicians, executives, and television commentators talking about artificial intelligence. They call it the next industrial revolution, the next economic boom, the next great source of growth. But from Tom's perspective, another reality is becoming harder to ignore. His electricity bills are rising. Infrastructure projects are appearing nearby. Utilities are warning about future demand. And while AI sounds exciting, the costs seem increasingly real. Tom is not alone. Across many parts of America, electricity demand is beginning to change in ways utilities did not expect only a few years ago. For decades, power consumption grew at a relatively manageable pace. Efficiency improvements helped offset rising demand. The system adjusted. The balance held. But AI is changing the calculation. Data centers consume extraordinary amounts of electricity. Electric vehicles require charging infrastructure. Advanced manufacturing facilities need reliable power. Semiconductor production demands enormous energy inputs. Each individual project may seem manageable. Together, they create something very different. A surge, not an overnight crisis, not a collapse, but steady pressure building throughout the system. And that pressure is forcing governments, utilities, and investors to ask difficult questions. Where will future electricity come from? How quickly can new generation capacity be built? Who has enough surplus power to support the next wave of growth? That is where Canada enters the story. Unlike many countries facing energy shortages, Canada possesses significant hydroelectric resources. In provinces such as Quebec, Manitoba, and British Columbia, massive hydro systems have supplied dependable electricity for decades. Many Canadians rarely think about these assets. They are simply part of everyday life. Lights turn on. Industries operate, communities grow, but what once looked ordinary is beginning to look strategically important, because while Silicon Valley competes over software, and technology companies compete over AI models, a quieter competition is emerging underneath. A competition for energy, and energy is much harder to scale overnight. A new AI model can be developed in months. A major power project can take years, sometimes decades. That difference matters, because what looked manageable on paper was becoming far more difficult in reality. The public conversation remained focused on technology, but the hidden challenge was increasingly about electricity, and what happened quietly afterward began changing the entire calculation. Because the next stage of this story would reveal just how fast AI demand was accelerating, and why both Washington and Ottawa were beginning to pay much closer attention. The numbers are difficult to ignore. Only a few years ago, most discussions about artificial intelligence focused on software, smarter algorithms, faster computing, better automation. But as companies rushed to build larger and more powerful AI systems, another reality emerged. Every breakthrough required more hardware, more servers, more cooling, more electricity. The AI revolution was becoming an energy story. Across America, technology giants began announcing billions of dollars in new data center investments. Entire campuses were planned, thousands of servers packed into massive facilities, each one designed to process unimaginable amounts of information every second. The public saw impressive AI products. Investors saw future profits. But utility operators saw something else. Demand curves moving upward at a speed they had not anticipated. What makes this different from previous technology booms is scale. A traditional office building consumes electricity. A shopping center consumes electricity. Even a factory consumes electricity. But some next-generation AI facilities can use power comparable to that of a small city. And unlike many industries, these systems often operate continuously. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No pauses. No shutdowns, just constant demand. Suddenly, electricity was no longer a background issue. It was becoming a strategic resource. Tom began noticing the change without fully understanding its cause. Local news reports discussed grid upgrades. Power companies requested rate increases. Infrastructure investments expanded. At first, these seemed like isolated developments. Then the pattern became harder to ignore. Every conversation appeared connected to growing electricity demand. Every new industrial project seemed to require more capacity. Every forecast projected higher future consumption. For people living on fixed incomes, the issue felt personal. The future might belong to AI, but ordinary households still had to pay their monthly bills. And for many Americans, that reality created growing anxiety. But something very different was happening north of the border. More than 1,000 miles away, David was beginning to hear conversations he had not heard in years. Investors were visiting. Energy developers were evaluating new opportunities. Technology companies were studying locations across Canada. For decades, communities like his often watched opportunities leave. Young workers moved elsewhere. Investment followed larger markets. Growth happened somewhere else. Now, for the first time in years, the flow appeared to be changing. Not dramatically. Not overnight, but enough to raise an important question. Why were international companies suddenly paying closer attention to Canadian energy resources? The answer was surprisingly simple. Reliable electricity was becoming harder to find. Canada offered several advantages at the same time: large hydroelectric systems, political stability, abundant fresh water for cooling infrastructure, relatively cool climates that help reduce energy consumption, and, perhaps most important of all, room to grow. What started as an energy advantage was slowly becoming an investment advantage, and that possibility carried enormous implications. Because if companies chose to build data centers inside Canada rather than simply buying Canadian electricity, the economic impact could become much larger. Jobs would stay local. Construction spending would stay local. Infrastructure investment would stay local. Tax revenue would stay local. The entire conversation would change. For decades, Canada often exported raw value and imported finished value. Resources left. Profits returned later through other channels. But AI infrastructure introduced a different possibility. What if more value remained inside Canada from the beginning? What if electricity became the foundation for a new generation of investment? What if Canada moved beyond being a supplier and became part of the platform itself? Those questions were beginning to attract attention in Ottawa, and they were beginning to attract attention in Washington as well. Because American policymakers understood something important. The race for AI leadership was no longer just about algorithms. It was about infrastructure. It was about energy. It was about capacity. And whoever solved those problems first could gain a significant advantage. If you worked in energy manufacturing or infrastructure, I would like to hear your perspective below. Because what looked like a technology boom was quietly becoming a competition over power. But Washington was about to discover that buying electricity was only one option, and that realization would open an entirely new chapter in the story. At first glance, the solution seemed obvious. America needed more electricity. Canada had electricity. The answer appeared simple: build more transmission lines, export more power, strengthen existing agreements. Move on. But the deeper policymakers looked, the more complicated the situation became. Because exporting electricity generates revenue. Building an entire AI ecosystem generates influence. And those are not the same thing. For years, economic development followed a familiar pattern. Resources were extracted in one place. Value was created somewhere else. A mining community produced raw materials. A manufacturing center transformed them. A technology company captured the largest profits. The highest-paying jobs often appeared at the end of the chain, rather than the beginning. Canada understands this reality better than most countries. For generations, Canadians watched resources leave while higher-value industries concentrated elsewhere. Oil, natural gas, timber, minerals. The pattern repeated itself again and again. The question now facing Ottawa is whether the AI era creates a rare opportunity to change that pattern. And this is where Mark Carney enters the story. Carney's challenge is not to compete directly against America. That would be unrealistic. The United States remains the world's largest economy. It possesses deeper capital markets, larger technology companies, greater financial resources. But successful strategy is rarely about defeating larger competitors. It is often about identifying advantages they cannot easily replace. And Canada may possess exactly that kind of advantage. Imagine two possible futures. In the first scenario, Canada simply exports more electricity south. Revenue increases. Utilities benefit. Cross-border cooperation expands. The relationship remains largely unchanged. Now consider a second scenario. Instead of exporting only power, Canada attracts more AI infrastructure directly. Data centers, research facilities, cloud computing operations, advanced digital infrastructure. The electricity remains inside Canada. The investment remains inside Canada. And a larger share of economic value remains inside Canada as well. That possibility is beginning to attract attention from investors around the world. Because energy is becoming one of the most important site selection factors in the AI economy. A company can purchase servers almost anywhere. It can hire software engineers in many locations. But securing reliable long-term electricity at competitive prices is becoming increasingly difficult. And difficulty creates leverage, not political leverage, economic leverage, the kind that changes investment decisions, the kind that influences corporate strategy, the kind that slowly reshapes entire industries. David sees small signs of this shift already. His son graduated several years ago. Like many young Canadians, he once assumed the biggest opportunities would eventually require moving elsewhere. Perhaps Toronto, perhaps Vancouver, perhaps even the United States. That assumption no longer feels as certain. New projects are appearing. New discussions are taking place. New possibilities are emerging. No one knows exactly how large the opportunity could become. But for the first time in years, some younger workers are asking a different question. What if the opportunity comes here instead? For families across Canada, that question carries enormous emotional weight. Communities do not grow because of economic statistics. They grow because people choose to stay. They grow because young workers build careers. They grow because families believe there is a future worth investing in. And that may be the most important consequence of all. Because pressure inside small Canadian communities was quietly building for years. Population decline, aging workforces, outmigration, economic uncertainty. Now the AI boom is creating a potential counterforce. Not a guaranteed solution, not a miracle, but a genuine opportunity. Yet every opportunity creates new challenges. Because if Canada becomes more attractive for AI infrastructure, competition will intensify. American states will compete aggressively for investment. European governments will offer incentives. Asian economies will expand their own capacity. And technology companies will constantly search for the best combination of cost reliability and growth potential. That means Canada cannot rely on natural advantages alone. Infrastructure must expand. Regulations must remain predictable. Energy systems must continue growing. And policymakers must make decisions years before the full demand arrives. Because the real competition is not happening today. It is happening in preparation for tomorrow. And that is where the story becomes even more complicated. Because Washington may welcome Canadian electricity, but it may not welcome seeing a growing share of AI investment move north. The real competition was no longer about electricity. It was about where the future would be built. And what happened next exposed a much deeper vulnerability on both sides of the border. The deeper this story goes, the more it becomes clear that neither side holds a perfect position. America has scale. Canada has resources. America has technology leadership. Canada has energy advantages. Both need each other, and both would prefer not to depend too heavily on the other. That tension has existed for decades, but the AI era is beginning to expose new vulnerabilities that few people discussed in the past. Most people assume America's greatest strength is its technology sector, and that assumption is largely correct. Companies across the United States continue to lead many of the world's most important AI developments. But technological leadership creates its own pressures. Success attracts demand. Demand requires infrastructure. Infrastructure requires energy, and energy requires time. This is where the challenge becomes visible. Building a powerful AI model may take months. Building a major transmission corridor may take years. Constructing new generation capacity can take even longer. The physical world moves more slowly than the digital world. That gap is becoming increasingly important. For decades, technology advanced faster than infrastructure. Now the consequences are beginning to appear. Every new AI announcement creates excitement. Every new investment announcement creates headlines. But behind the scenes, utility operators are studying power forecasts. Grid planners are reviewing long-term capacity. Governments are asking difficult questions about future supply because the system was already beginning to strain, and strain has consequences. Tom feels those consequences in a practical way. He does not spend his evenings reading reports about artificial intelligence. He is not analyzing investment trends. He simply notices that costs seem to rise everywhere. Energy, housing, insurance, food. Like millions of retirees, he watches carefully because every dollar matters. The irony is hard to miss. The same technology that promises extraordinary economic growth also requires extraordinary amounts of infrastructure spending. And those costs rarely remain invisible forever. Eventually, they move through the system. Businesses pay more. Utilities invest more. Consumers absorb part of the burden. What looks like a technology story becomes a household story. What looks like innovation becomes an affordability issue. And that creates political pressure, a great deal of political pressure. No government wants voters asking why electricity costs are rising. No government wants businesses questioning future reliability. No government wants investors doubting long-term capacity. Which brings us back to Canada, because Canada's advantage may not be unlimited. Hydroelectric power is valuable, but growing demand creates new challenges here as well. Transmission systems must be upgraded. New projects require approvals. Communities have concerns. Environmental reviews take time. The same realities affecting America also affect Canada. The difference is that Canada begins from a somewhat stronger position in certain regions. And that difference could matter enormously, because in strategic competition, advantages do not need to be overwhelming. They simply need to be difficult to replace. This is why Mark Carney's potential approach deserves attention. Rather than framing energy as a weapon against America, a more realistic strategy would be to treat energy as a foundation for growth. There is an important distinction. One approach creates conflict. The other creates leverage. One focuses on confrontation. The other focuses on attracting investment. Historically, the most successful economies rarely become stronger by restricting opportunity. They become stronger by becoming indispensable. That may be the most important idea in this entire story. Canada does not need America to fail. Canada benefits when North America succeeds. But Canada can still improve its position within that success. It can build more infrastructure. It can attract more investment. It can encourage more innovation. And it can capture more value from resources it already possesses. That is a much different narrative than the traditional trade disputes Canadians have watched for years. Tariffs create winners and losers. Economic uncertainty creates fear. But infrastructure investment creates possibility. And for many Canadians, that possibility feels increasingly real. Yet the effects did not stop at the border. Because as North America races to secure enough energy for AI, other countries are watching very carefully. And what started as a question about electricity was quietly becoming part of a much larger global competition. For most of the 20th century, economic power was often measured by factories, oil fields, ports, and financial centers. Countries competed for manufacturing. They competed for resources. They competed for trade routes. But the AI era is creating a different kind of competition, a competition for energy security. And that competition extends far beyond North America. In Beijing, policymakers understand that artificial intelligence requires enormous computing infrastructure. In Brussels, leaders face growing questions about energy affordability and industrial competitiveness. In Tokyo, long-term energy reliability remains a strategic concern. In Mexico City, officials are looking for opportunities to attract investment from companies searching for alternative locations. Everyone sees the same trend. The future economy will require more electricity, a great deal more electricity, and whoever provides that electricity may gain influence that extends far beyond the energy sector itself. That is why investors are paying close attention. Money follows opportunity, but it also follows certainty. Technology companies can tolerate competition. They can tolerate regulation. They can tolerate changing markets. What they struggle to tolerate is uncertainty about power. Without reliable electricity, none of the promises surrounding artificial intelligence matter. The most advanced AI model in the world becomes useless if the infrastructure supporting it cannot expand. That simple reality is reshaping investment decisions across multiple continents. And this is where Canada's position becomes particularly interesting. For decades, international investors often viewed Canada primarily through the lens of natural resources: oil, gas, mining, forestry. Important industries, certainly, but industries often associated with extraction rather than technological leadership. The AI era may begin changing that perception, not because Canada suddenly becomes Silicon Valley, not because Canada overtakes America's technology sector, but because energy itself is becoming a technology asset. That distinction matters a great deal. Because if energy becomes one of the defining constraints of AI growth, countries with stable energy systems gain strategic importance. And strategic importance attracts capital. What started as a utility question slowly becomes an investment question, then an employment question, then a national competitiveness question, and eventually a geopolitical question. Meanwhile, another possibility is beginning to emerge, one that many viewers may not have considered. For years, the global conversation focused heavily on semiconductor shortages. The world worried about computer chips, supply chains, advanced manufacturing capacity. Those concerns remain important. But what if the next bottleneck is different? What if the future shortage is not computing hardware? What if it is electricity? A data center can purchase additional servers, but it cannot instantly create additional generation capacity. A company can buy more chips. It cannot instantly build a hydroelectric dam. That difference changes everything. Because infrastructure constraints tend to arrive slowly. Then suddenly, at first they seem manageable. Then they become urgent. Then everyone starts competing for the same limited resources. History offers many examples: oil, natural gas, industrial metals, transportation networks. The pattern repeats itself, and some investors now wonder whether reliable electricity could become one of the defining strategic assets of the AI age. If that happens, North America's internal balance could shift in subtle but important ways. Not dramatically, not overnight, but enough to influence where projects are built, where jobs are created, where investment flows, and where future economic growth concentrates. That possibility should not be exaggerated, but it should not be ignored either. Because the real story was never about Canada defeating America, nor was it about America losing its technological leadership. The real story is about adaptation, about positioning, about recognizing opportunities before they become obvious. And that raises a much larger question. If AI transforms the global economy over the next decade, which countries will be prepared not only to consume that future, but to help power it? And for Canada, the answer to that question may shape economic decisions for an entire generation. When people talk about artificial intelligence, they usually focus on software, the latest chatbot, the newest breakthrough, the next trillion-dollar company. But beneath every headline sits something far less glamorous: transmission lines, power stations, hydroelectric facilities, energy infrastructure, the physical systems that make digital progress possible. That is why this story matters. Not because a conflict is guaranteed, not because Canada and the United States are suddenly becoming rivals, but because both countries are entering a period of economic change that will require difficult choices. America remains the dominant force in artificial intelligence. Its innovation ecosystem remains unmatched. Its technology sector continues to attract extraordinary amounts of capital and talent. That reality is unlikely to change anytime soon. Yet even great strengths create new dependencies, and the rapid expansion of AI is creating one of them: electricity. Reliable, affordable, long-term electricity. At the same time, Canada finds itself in an unusual position. For years, many Canadians worried about dependence on larger markets, dependence on foreign investment, dependence on decisions made elsewhere. Now a different possibility is emerging. Canada may possess assets that become increasingly valuable in an AI-driven world, not because Canada planned for this exact moment, but because decades of energy development created advantages that are suddenly attracting new attention. The challenge now is deciding how to use those advantages. This is where leadership matters. Mark Carney's opportunity is not to challenge America. It is not to create unnecessary confrontation. And it is certainly not to build prosperity from conflict. The greater opportunity may be much simpler: to make Canada more attractive, more competitive, more resilient, and more difficult to overlook. Because countries rarely become stronger by reacting to every external pressure. They become stronger by building long-term capabilities of their own. That approach requires patience, investment, infrastructure, planning, and perhaps most importantly, confidence. confidence that Canada can play a larger role in shaping North America's economic future. David hopes that confidence proves justified, not because he expects overnight transformation, not because he believes every promise will become reality, but because he sees something many communities have not seen in a long time: possibility. The possibility that future investment may arrive instead of leaving. The possibility that younger generations may find reasons to stay. The possibility that Canada's role in the North American economy may continue evolving. Meanwhile, Tom continues watching events unfold from Ohio. Like millions of Americans, he wants economic growth. He wants innovation. He wants stability. And ultimately, both countries share those same goals. That may be the most important lesson of all. The future of North America will not be decided by who wins and who loses. It will be shaped by how both countries adapt to extraordinary technological change. The AI revolution may create new tensions, new negotiations, new strategic questions, but it may also create new opportunities for cooperation. Because what happens next is bigger than electricity, bigger than data centers, and even bigger than artificial intelligence itself. It is a question about where economic opportunity will emerge in the decades ahead, and whether Canada is prepared to seize a moment that few people saw coming. If you value calm, long-form Canada analysis, subscribe and stay with us. And as this story continues to evolve, one question remains. Will Canada simply supply the energy behind the AI revolution? Or will it help build the future that energy makes possible? If Canada's future matters to you, stay part of this conversation. Because smaller nations rarely get easy choices in a changing world. But sometimes they do get rare opportunities, and this may be one of them.